Welcome to People Love Process. This movie is the first in a two-part series on creating custom vector brushes and showcasing how to use them within your design and illustration projects. Now, in this first movie, I'll focus on the top 3 brush formats in Adobe Illustrator. There's 5 total, but we're only going to go over 3 and focus on those because they're the most used parts in Illustrator when it comes to creating vector brushes. And that first format is art brushes. We're going to cover scatter brushes, and we're also going to cover pattern brushes. You'll learn everything you need to know so you can create, control, and put your own custom vector brushes to use. We have a lot to cover and demonstrate, so let's get started. Before we jump into actually creating a brush, I need to go over some craftsmanship aspects of creating vector brushes, something important to know. Now, whether you work in CMYK mode, which I pretty much do 99% of the time, or RGB mode, this is going to apply to you. If you work in RGB, you're probably already doing this, and in which case you're not going to have a problem. The reason why I'm showing you this is when I first approached vector brushes years ago, I made an accident, and I want to explain to you how you can avoid that in any context, regardless if you work in CMYK or RGB. So if you look at the file we're in now, we have 3 blocks here, 3 square shapes. It's all black, and you might not even be able to tell the subtle differences between each of these blocks. If I select this one, it's basically the default black in Illustrator. If I click on this swatch, double click on it, you can see all it is 0 cyan, 0 magenta, 0 yellow, and 100% K. So it's a regular black. You don't want to use this to create your brush. Now, all brushes are based off of black and white artwork if you plan on recoloring them in their final use. Now, you can create a full color brush, in which case this won't really apply to that. But I'm talking about most usages for vector-based brushes are all going to be based on black and white artwork, and you don't want to use regular black, and I'm going to show you why. Here's another black. This black is a process black. If we click into this, you can see it's 40% cyan, 20% magenta, 20% yellow, and 100% K, which represents the key color black. Now, I use this for both design projects and illustration projects, and I've been using it for years. It works really great. It gives you a nice, rich black, hence the term rich black. Usually you don't want to go over 200%. These are percentages. That's why there's a percentage next to them. And if you add all of these up, here you have 180%. Usually printers don't want you to go over 200%, what's called ink density. So this works good for design, illustration, but again, not ideal for brushes. And I'm going to show you why next. So let's go to this one. This one is also colored process black. Now, if we click into this and you see what color this is, if I decide to change this to use it for a brush, is it going to work? Well, let's go to the color. You can see it says 40, 20, 20, 100. We'll click into here. You can see that break. Now we want to convert this to RGB. So we'll click on the option menu and we'll go RGB. And this is what you'll get when you convert that. It's not a true RGB equivalent black. You can see it's close. It's almost 000, but not quite. If you bring this over, this would be RGB black. So it was just off, just a little bit. Not a whole lot, but enough to cause problems. And I'm going to explain that. So just stay with me for a second here. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring that color down into here. And if I double click into it, you can see it automatically, because we're in CMYK mode, it automatically creates this fractional break. This is the CMYK equivalent of RGB black. This is where I'll turn this to a global color, and I usually rename this when I'm creating brushes to inky black for no other reason than I've been using it for years. You can name it you can call it brush black if you wanted to, but this is going to work for RGB. And how do I know that? Well, let's click OK to commit to it. So now we have this one colored the inky black color. But let's go here. You can see inky black, and let's turn this to RGB, and notice you get an RGB equivalent. So you want to use an RGB equivalent black if you're creating your brushes within CMYK. If you're creating your brushes in RGB mode, just use RGB black and you don't have to worry about this. If you create it in using an RGB equivalent black in CMYK, and let's say you create a set and you sell it on Creative Market, for example, it's going to work for any user, whether they're in CMYK mode, whether they're in RGB mode. That's the problem I ran into because I used regular black to create a whole set of brushes that I sold years ago. And I found out when RGB users went to use it, it didn't work. And why is that? Well, let's click to this file. And here we have regular black on the left. Here we have our inky black, our equivalent to RGB black. So when I create brushes, it all starts with the vector brush here. This is the artwork, and it's colored. You can see it's colored. If we go to swatches, it's colored regular black, and this one is colored inky black. Now, by the way, I should point out, I can select this without seeing the anchor points. And let's jump over to the preferences really quick because I want to point out a couple of things. When you're in preferences, whether or not, like normally when I'm creating, I have show tool tips on. Normally when I'm recording for the People of Process channel, I turn that off just because it just looks nicer. It's a higher production value without things popping up on screen. But I'm going to keep that on for the two movies I'm recording for vector brushes because I like to use it in a certain way, and I'll show you that in just a second. But mainly go to Selection and Anchor Display. You'll want to turn these off, this one here off. We're going to toggle it on, and I'm going to return, click OK. I'm going to return because when I select a shape, you're going to see all these anchor points, and it kind of gets in the way of viewing the vector art. So when you're creating brushes, I always go to Preferences, go to Selection, Anchor Display, and turn that off. That way, when I select, I can just see the art and not so much the anchors. I don't have to worry about the anchors. Now, why do I have tooltips on? Because I can hover over a color and it tells me exactly what that color break is. We're in RGB mode right now, but it shows you what the color breaks is. That's why I like using that. Same way in CMYK, I hover over a color and it'll give me the CMYK break. So all we're going to do is open up the brushes palette. You can see we have a regular black brush and we have an inky black brush created using the exact same artwork. Once you have a brush, you can apply it to any stroke. It'll take on the color of the stroke and the size of the stroke, whether it's 1 point or 2 point, will make the brush larger or smaller based off of the point size. So if we select this one, color it regular black, we'll select this one and we'll apply, that is, the regular black brush. We'll do the same on the right, but this, keep in mind, is made with the inky brush. So we'll go ahead and apply that, and we'll apply that to this one. And if you look at this, you might be going, okay, so what? It's like it looks identical. Well, not really. And this is going to do a better job of explaining it. Here we have this turquoise colors. We have both a fill and a stroke, as it's shown here. And we're going to apply the brush, because brushes apply to strokes, not fills. We're going to apply a brush to the stroke on this one, and we're going to use the regular black. So I'll click that, and you can see it apply. We'll select this one, and we're going to apply the inky black to this stroke on this side. Look at the difference. If we zoom in on this one, notice that the outline is applied, has the brush applied, but because it's not a true RGB, it comes off looking like a 90% tint or value of the base color that we colored it. Whereas if you use an inky black or an RGB equivalent black, it'll look as it should. It'll look as it is intended to look. It has the brush applied, and both the fill and the stroke are the same color. And when you build your brush right using the right black, an RGB equivalent black, you'll get the right result. If you don't, you're going to get this, and it's going to cause problems. That's the mistake I made years ago, and I had to redo all my brushes, like almost 100 of them. It was kind of nuts. But I learned from that, and I just wanted to kind of demonstrate it for you so you understand why you should use RGB equivalent black when you create brushes. Now, this brings us to our first brush format, and that is art brushes. So I want to show you how you can create and utilize, control, and just experiment with art brushes. It's the best brush format, in my opinion, in Illustrator, the easiest to understand, that is. Scatter brushes are awesome too, but let's dive into it. So we're going to start with what kind of inspired me to even start creating art brushes back in the day. The local TEDx came up with a theme for their program called Fearless. Move forward and be fearless in whatever you do. Don't let fear hold you back. That type of messaging was the theme of the TEDx. And so I decided to take that theme and apply it to the process of creating a custom logo type for the event. And what I did is I decided I'm going to paint it by hand and not do it in vector format. Now, ultimately, I scanned it in and image traced it so it would be easy to use for them. But everything I painted by hand with this brush. This is just a cheap little brush from the hardware store, watered down acrylic paint. And after I started painting out all these letter forms, I started just brushing on paper, and I go, wow, these look cool. I wonder if I could like image trace these and turn them into vector brushes. So this is where it started. And when I did that, I was really pleasantly surprised. Now, it doesn't just come down to creating it manually yourself. You can create a brush from found imagery, meaning 35 feet from where I'm sitting right now in our front yard is this tree. And I saw the bark on this tree, and I thought, hey, this would make a really cool brush. And you're going, come on. Well, here you go. Here's the bark image that I created, took a photograph, brought it into Photoshop, blew it out so it's black and white, and this is what I image trace. Now, when you create a brush, it needs to be in a horizontal format. Think laying down on your back. It can't be standing up tall. That's not going to work correctly. So if you take this, you just want to rotate it after you scan it in so it's in this orientation. Then you can take the artwork and we can image trace it. So let's go ahead and we're going to close this panel really quick. And I'm going to go ahead and go to image trace, and we're going to open it up. Here's image trace here. And let's go ahead and pull it over like that. And here's one thing. Notice I have the brush selected, but this is all grayed out. Why is that? Well, somebody at Adobe decided that it won't work until you deselect, then you select, then it will light up. So just, I don't know why. It shouldn't matter, but that's the way somebody decided it should work. So what I usually do is I open up this panel, then I select it. And for the longest time, I'd go click and I'd go, this would be closed. I'd click something. Okay, I'm going to image trace it. And then I'm like, well, why is it grayed out? Well, it took me a bit to figure out, oh, okay, that's kind of dumb. So that might hang you up if you've ever tried to do that. Just know you're not doing anything wrong. That tends to be the argument most of the time with Illustrator. You're not doing anything wrong. That's just the way it behaves. So we're going to image trace this. When I image trace, this is a bitmap TIFF. I scanned in on a flatbed scanner. Another great reason to have a flatbed scanner. Scan these in at, I believe these are 600 ppi. It's a bitmap TIFF. So we're just talking black and white pixels. So what is white is going to be transparent. Well, basically won't be there. We're not image tracing that. We're just image tracing the black pixels. Now, to ensure that, I want to trace it tight. So I'm going to bring paths all the way up to 100, noise all the way down to 1. And you want to make sure to click on ignore white. That way it won't turn the white background of your image into vector art. You don't need that. It'll just ignore it and focus on creating vector art based off of the black pixels only. You also want to make sure you always have the control bar on in Illustrator under Window here. That puts this bar at the top and it gives you shortcuts to all kinds of things you're doing in the moment. So in this case, I'm going to image trace this by clicking Trace. Now it's image traced. I go up to the control bar and I just click Expand. Now we've image traced our vector art brush. But this is where I made the problem, because what color is this? Well, it's still colored regular black. So if I go to the color here, you can see it's just regular 100% black. And this is what caused my problem to begin with. So this is why I have inky black. So I'll have this selected and I'll just fill it with inky black. Now it's the RGB equivalent black. We can go ahead and close image trace. We'll put it up there. And now we'll open up the brushes panel because we're going to turn this into an art brush. So with it selected, I'll click the plus button, select art brush because that's the format. Notice there's 5 formats of brushes in Illustrator. What we're covering in the next 2 movies in both parts is art brushes, scatter brushes, and pattern brushes. The bristle brush is one of the, I don't know, I just think it's one of the dumbest features they've ever added. So I never use that. You might want to experiment with it and see if it's useful for whatever you're creating. You might find a use. I just never use it. The one I do use, which is a really nice thing, but it's kind of complex because it requires you to have a secondary device such as a Wacom Cintiq, and that's a calligraphic brush. I'll give you a little sneak peek on that when we go into scatter brushes, just to show you, to give you an idea and explain a little bit on what you can do with one, but I'm saving that for another movie so I can focus on it because it is really cool. It allows you to do digital inking, much like you can do on the iPad, but within the context of Illustrator, as long as you have a Wacom tablet or equivalent. So we're going to focus on art brushes, click OK. Once we're in here, we can name this whatever we want. This one, we'll get really original and we'll just call it paintbrush. And we're going to colorization method will be tints, because whatever path we apply it to, whatever color that path is, it's going to take on that tint, and that's what we want. So with just those 2 things, naming it, selecting tints, we're going to leave everything by default. So super easy. You don't need to do anything more. Click OK. It's showing up here. Here's our paintbrush. Here's this one based off of the bark. And we're going to do the same thing. So we'll click the plus sign, go to art brush, click OK, select tints so we can color it. And we'll call this Barky. There you go. We're getting a little more original, and click OK. So we have both of those brushes here, paintbrush and Barky. I should have called it Barky brush. Oh, well. Now, the way you use a brush is a brush, any vector brush, maps along a path. It has to do with the strokes, not the fills, even though that comes into play. I'll show you some of that coming up. So all we can do is we can select a path like this and apply a brush like that. We can select this path and apply the bark brush like that. So that's, for the most part, how that works. We can also use the paintbrush tool But I'm going to show you that in a little bit because I want to show you a couple other brushes first. So let's move to those. In here, we have a brush here. Now, this brush, I showed you how I derived that the barky brush from the bark of the tree. Well, sourcing your textures is where texture exploration comes from, or texture exploring is what I like to call it. Whenever I travel, I always take time to walk around the area looking for cool textures. They're everywhere. The bark texture is 35 feet from where I'm sitting right now, so not hard to do that kind of exploration. So where did I get this texture? Because it makes a really cool brush. Well, me and my friend John, every year we try to go to what's called a rat rod show. Now, a rat rod show is like hot rods, but they're kind of really degraded, and some of them usually have themes. There was a zombie truck theme one year and a Frankenstein car another year. Really cool. But this shows what is the type of vehicles you'll find at a rat rod. Now, their engines are pretty souped up like hot rods are. It's just they don't care about the nice paint jobs and perfect chrome. They just allow the car to look pretty much like they found it, but they've just fixed it up so it operates really well. It's a cool genre to check out if you ever get a chance. Well, one year, this guy had this old retro school bus, and it had all these textures on it. So I just called it the texture bus. I spent about an hour photographing all these textures. Now, the brush I want to show you came from the opposite side of this front. And this is the photo I took of that opposite side. And I just isolated this to create that brush. Now, once again, you don't have to do texture exploring to figure out a brush. You can manually create a really cool brush, and it looks very organic and authentic. So if we click on this, you can see here's a sponge I took, watered down acrylic black paint again, and just tapped the surface of the paper to create a bunch of different iterations you could turn into brushes. So I just wanted to show you that because knowing where the sources come from might give you ideas of where you could go to find some cool sources. So this came from the texture brush. This is the image trace of that texture brush. And if I select this, I can apply that texture brush to a path like this. Here's this one, which was created with the sponge, image traced. And again, I can apply that to this path. So it's really cool. All the different brushes you can create. You're only limited by your imagination. So pay attention to what's around you and then figure out what you can turn into a brush. Now let's test drive some of these because it's important to understand how to control them. So if we take that texture bus texture, I'm going to go to the paintbrush tool and I'm going to double click on it because normally, I believe the default on this is either right in the middle or here. And you don't want that because if I click OK, if I go ahead and select this brush, let's pick a nice color. We'll do this kind of tan color. Oops, make sure it's on the path, not a fill. So we've loaded the color. We've selected the paintbrush, loaded the color onto the brush. We have the brush selected, and now we can just paint out that brush. Now, the thing about an art brush you have to keep in mind is it stretches the length of your path. So the longer the path, the more distorted. The shorter the path, let's do a short one here, it kind of squashes it. So as long as you understand that, that's all you need to know, and you can build your brush accordingly. Now, if I select this anchor, you can see right now we have 7 anchor points on this. If we go up here, we have 3. This is why before I start using the brushes, I'll double click and I'll set this almost to smooth because if I go back and draw this path again, it's going to have only this time 4 anchor points. So you save a little bit in terms of overall memory because believe me, these start adding up over time. So once again, this texture, this kind of texture brush, not so great for painting. If I select the painter brush, we go select teal, and I do this, that looks pretty good. Now, if I change the color to this yellow and I go to transparency and I select multiply, maybe we change the opacity to 80, it's going to remember this. And so if I use the same brush going the opposite way, you can see the cool effects you're going to get. Now it's going to, every time, now as I move forward, and let's say I select the bark brush now, and I go to this kind of brownish color, and I do the bark brush like this, and I select it, notice it retains those transparency settings, both multiply and 80%. Now, this is a good thing because as you're painting or you're applying the brushes to your artwork or design, you can do overlap like that. Maybe you change the color to green, and you can get all kinds of looks by overlapping various things. Now, this brush that we created, oh, that's the bark brush. I meant to grab this one. This brush, like that, looks good. Now, here's the thing that's going to work really well for this, is if I go ahead and, let's see, we'll go, I'll go like this. We'll change the color, go like this, change the color again, go like that. So you can experiment a lot with this and just see what you can come up with. It just depends on what you're creating and what you're putting together. Once again, the key thing is to understand the orientation. So if we go back to this paintbrush one, and let's go ahead and select, we'll select green. We'll just put this to normal and 100%. If you paint out with the paintbrush here and you go left to right, that's how the brush will display. If you go right to left, it'll flip it. So that's how you can make those changes as you're doing it, so not everything replicates exactly the same way. And again, if you have those transparency settings, you'll remember it on the next iteration you apply using the paintbrush. Now, if you want this larger, then you would go to the stroke. It's on a 1 point. You can beef it up to 2. So you can see how it gets a lot bigger. You can also go down in size and control that with this. But again, it's stretching here. So if I drew it out at 0.5 and I go maybe that long, then it doesn't look so distorted. So art brushes, you can distort them, but that's okay. The most forgivable ones, in my opinion, are these kind of texture-related brushes, the paintbrush specifically. If we go back to the bark brush again, if you do that long, it'll be distorted, but you can do it short like this. You might want to bring that up. You might be able to use it this distorted at 2 points. You can always select the path and adjust it. You can always adjust the path itself using the Bezier curve handles just to control it even more. So that's how you can control and orient your vector brushes. So I just wanted to go over that. Now, when I created these brushes, I figured out I'm going to have to do an illustration, and I created this painted snake illustration, and this was a game changer for me. This is where I go, wow, I need to do more of this. And so just experiment with it. It doesn't even have to be illustration. Maybe you want to use it in a design project. Here's a good example of that. Here's a poster for the Seattle Symphony, and we took the musical instrument and we used that, the painter brushes on it just to give it a more artistic feel and look. So it doesn't have to be illustration specifically, although it works great for that. Here's another illustration I did for, I called it Bird Brain. And this source file is included in exercise files, so you can deconstruct it and see how I adjusted and what transparency settings and blend modes I used to compose this. It's all layered. But maybe you're doing something where you need a little image of a fruit. This would be a great way to handle it so it doesn't look clean and like sharp edge and hard, which most people think of when they think of vector art. It looks more organic, and you could use this on a label design. So that's a good example of how this can be utilized in a real world context. Now, let's jump to something that is illustrative, and this is Pac and Sal. They're two best buddies, an elephant and a salmon. This was my original rough sketch, and like all sketches, I'll usually set it to about 20%, lock the layer, and just build my vector shapes. Now, when you're using art brushes to create an illustration like this, there's a specific process I used. And the process is I like to have a fill, and you can see the fill here. Let's go to the appearance panel. So if we open the appearance panel, you see I have a stroke of almost 1 point. I sized this down from the original. I believe it was 1 point. And then I have a fill. Both are the same color. Well, why am I doing that? Because I want to apply what I call line work brushes to that outline. Now, I'm kind of showing you something before I show you how I create these line work brushes, because these aren't art brushes. These are technically pattern brushes, but I'm ignoring how pattern brushes are supposed to work and just focusing on one part of a pattern brush because it works great for doing this line work. An art brush will stretch along a path and distort it. So you wouldn't want to apply in this case, let's go ahead and just show that. Let's go ahead and color this color, and let's apply this art brush to it. Okay, that's what it looks like applied to that path, because it's that one brush vector art shape stretched out. And that's not going to work, even if you size this down quite a bit. If we go here and we go to 5, it's okay. It's not ideal, and it's harder to control. So I don't do that. I just use pattern brushes, and on this one, we're going to use this pattern brush. So let's zoom in so you can appreciate what it does here. Let's zoom in on his trunk right here, and we'll just select this, and we're going to go to this brush here and apply it, and look at how cool the edge becomes. It looks more organic, and it does that all around. We can do that on all of these, on his legs. We can apply those here, and look how nice that looks. We can take this, which is inside of his mouth. We can apply the brush to that, and if you don't like it on front, that's no big deal. We could just select this, copy it, paste behind like that, and that looks great. If we go back here, we can take the tail. We can do the same thing. We can apply a brush to that. And that's why I use line work brushes with the outline. Now, here's something that I want to show you. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go like this. Actually, let's go ahead and sample that. So now I have our outline that we originally had, both the stroke and the fill that was on the elephant is now up here on this. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and apply a line work brush to that so you can see that. Let's go ahead and just purposely make this larger so you can see that there's a line work brush here. Now notice when it gets to the corner, it doesn't do anything. So this is where I usually go in, and you can use the corner widget, and I'll put little rounds, even smaller than that. Actually, let's do all of them at once like this. And I'll just put little rounds because it wraps around those corners and it looks better than leaving them sharp. When you leave them sharp, you're going to get a gap there because it can't wrap around it. So that's one thing that I do. And I did that on this artwork. So little tiny rounds and areas. So it does that. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, let's say you want to apply a gradient to this. And this is something my friend Morty showed me years ago. So I'm working on this. I have a fill. I want a gradient. I want this whole shape to go from a dark gray to a light gray. And let's just apply a gradient. Well, a gradient will apply to fill. And since I forget what version, you can even apply a gradient to a stroke. But that's not really what I want. Let's go back. What I want is a gradient to apply to this whole shape as if it's just one unified shape that I'm applying a color to. Well, how do you do that? Well, you would have to select it. Notice here we have the line work, we have the fill here, and we're going to go Command G to group it. So now it's a group. We'll select the group, and we're going to go to the option menu, and we're going to go Add New Fill. There's our new fill is that's not the color we want. So we'll select it, and we're going to go down here to this, which is the body gradient we're going to use on the elephant. We'll click it, and now look, with this selected, notice it goes from a dark gray to a subtly lighter gray, but it carries it through the stroke and fill in a unified fashion. Now, this is applied to the content that we have on this shape. So you can see the contents. If I double click into this, you can see it still has the original stroke and fill. It's just applying it to the group overall. So that's kind of cool. I didn't even know that was possible until Morty told me that. So I would take the body of the elephant here. Once again, you can see we have the line work brush and the fill, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to group it, and then select group, go to the option menu on the palette and go Add New Fill, select our body gradient, and now we have that nice gradient going through the edge of that outline all the way over to the front. So that's how I did that. And all we're going to do here is we can get rid of this now. We're going to take his ear now, and we're going to apply a gradient to that just so it looks better in context, something like that. We continue to use these line work brushes, put on his ear like this. I think this one maybe a little bigger, something like that. We'll take that one, do that, take this one, do that. And I do it on all these little details all around. I'm not going to go through all those, but I do want to focus on his tail because I was kind of happy with I don't know, for lack of better terms, solving the tail, how I'm going to handle it. So I'd take these two and I go like this, but this was too big. So I go into this and I want it smaller. So I go like 0.7. I might take this one and kind of change it up. We'll use the first one here. Again, I'm going to go 0.7 because elephant tails are kind of strange looking like that. And again, I want this a lot smaller like that. Oh, maybe 7. Yeah, like that. Now, when you're zoomed up, this is like really zoomed in, but look at how nice it goes with the rest of the body. And if you know you're going to do multiple times of applying a brush to a shape, you could make a graphic style. So if I select this and click this graphic style, it just applies a line work brush to that. So that's how I use line work brushes. I'll also take the art brushes as well. Like if I go to, let's take this art brush, and we'll go ahead and select this color. We don't need the fill like that. And all I'm going to do is on this layer with the paintbrush, I'm going to just paint out kind of a stroke like that. And if you don't like that one, you can experiment. Maybe that one looks better. Maybe you want this or this. And this is what I usually do. That one's kind of nice. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this in kind of like that, copy it, paste it behind the body just to get a rougher edge. And I'll do that all around. Now, I'm not going to spend time doing that, but I just wanted to show you at least one so you understand how you can approach these things. And we're going to turn on this layer so it goes from the flat vector art with all the line work in place, with all of those edge kind of brush work in place. And I think this is going to work great. And then to paint with these brushes, if I turn this layer on, you can see all I've done is I've painted out strokes in various areas. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and let's see, we'll take this one like that. And I'm just going to paint up on his back as it goes up around here like that. I'll select it. I think it's, yeah, that's okay. We can go into transparency. Right now it's 25% and multiplied. That actually doesn't look bad. I might go, I don't know, let's try 30. Something like that. I like to switch it up, so I'm not using the same brush. So we'll change the brush. I'll do another one like that doesn't look good, so Command Z. By the way, I'm using a mouse. If you have a Wacom, way easier. So just pointing that out. So we'll go to this one, and this one I'd probably knock it down another 20 or another 10%. And that's how I get that illusion that it's shading from darker and getting lighter. I might even go less than that, and I might make this a bit smaller. So that's all I'm talking about when you're applying these brushes, is just experimenting. You can also move them if you think it looks better in a different position like that. Let's do a highlight because we need that. So let's select this one. We'll color it white. We don't want multiplier, else we won't be able to see it. And we'll do 100% value first with the paintbrush, and the light source is kind of here. So we'll start here and go all the way to the back. I don't like that. We'll Command Z like that, something like that. And we'll do one here. This is where I'll go to opacity, try 30. Like that. I don't like that it's over the ear. So this is where I just copy it to clipboard, select the ear, paste behind just to put it in the proper orientation. So is this a process that goes super fast? Well, not really, but it's kind of fun to work on. So this is how I approach this style. Now, when it's all said and done, this is how the final brushed artwork for Pac and Sal came out. We also added a background like this. All this is brushwork. If I go Command Y, you can see all the paths. These are still live brushes, so you can deconstruct this if you want to in the exercise file. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add a hat, but I even came up with a little fedora that Pat could wear. And this is where using textures, and you've seen me go over this in other movies where I use bitmap textures. And this is a great example of, in this case, of using a speckled texture. And I'm just going to move this into place like this. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and just select the light gray to fill it. Like that. We'll go down to multiply, and then I'll adjust the value to about 50%. And look at how cool that looks. Now, I use the exact same type of speckling texture, but on top with white, just so it gives that. Now, do you need that? Well, let me turn off the speckling without and with. I think it looks so much better with that speckling. So this was a lot of fun. Art brushes are a great way to kind of take your first foray into creating your own vector brushes. Just remember, always be looking around you for cool surface textures. Those make great brushes. And experiment and have fun with it. And I think you're going to be able to create something really, really cool. So let's move on to the next format. The next brush format is scatter brushes. This is a fun one, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I showed you before how I used a sponge to create one of the art brushes. Now, you can use these same analog methods to create scatter brushes as well. So the sponge is going to play a part in this one, but also that image that I took of the tree. We're going to use some of the moss that's shown on this tree as the actual device, for lack of a better term. Instead of using a paint brush like I did to create the brushes for the art brushes, I'm going to use a piece of moss to tap on the paper and create what ultimately will become the brush we turn it into. So just pull a chunk of moss off a tree in this case, and went back into my studio, and I just used that. You can see how I've tapped it on the paper over here just to create the artwork, and that's all I did. So whether you use a sponge, whether you use moss, you can use almost anything to create a brush from. But we're going to turn these specifically into scatter brushes. So once again, I want you to try image tracing these yourself. So within all of these formats, whether it's art brushes, scatter brushes, etc., you can use these to image trace yourself and see just to practice on your own. And you can see over this one, we have the moss already image traced. So what we're going to do first here is we're going to image trace them. And by the way, if you have this selected, let's go ahead and close this. Let's say you have this selected and then you expand the image trace panel. For whatever reason, it's grayed out, like, oh, nothing's selected. Well, yeah, it is. It's kind of stupid. I wish they'd fix that. So just make sure you expand the panel, then click it, then you can use it. I don't know why it matters, but somebody decided to make it that way. So with that selected, I'm just going to image trace this all the way to the right. Once again, you might want to adjust the settings on your own to what you prefer. We're going to click ignore white because we don't want the background to be made part of the brush. We just want what's showing in black, the black pixels basically of this bitmap TIFF will become the vector art that makes up the brush. We're going to click trace now. Make sure you have control turned on so you can just go up here and click expand. And now we have our artwork. Make sure to color it inky black, whether you're creating an art brush, a scatter brush, or a pattern brush. Always use an RGB black equivalent. So that's what we're going to do there. We can go ahead and collapse that, open the brushes panel, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the plus sign and we're going to select scatter brush, and we're going to go ahead and open this scatter brush up like this. And now we're going to go ahead and make some settings. Now, just keep in mind on a scatter brush, it's very kind of organic. It has randomness capabilities. Now, if you have a Wacom, you can take even further advantage of pressure sensitivity. If you go into any of these categories, you have size, the size of the brush, and you have the spacing of the brush, you have the scatter of the brush, how much it scatters, and how much it rotates as it's mapping on a path. So that's the first thing we're going to do is select path as it's associated to the stroke that you're going to apply it to or draw it out with using the paintbrush tool. The method, we're going to again select tints. That means we can color it anything we want. We'll go ahead and name this one. We'll call it, I don't know, spongy. Okay, yes, I entertain myself when I do these videos. Okay, on the size. Now, a lot of people, when I first started creating a scattering brush, I'm going, well, I don't know what any of this stuff means. I mean, they don't really explain it. You know, I have tooltips held on, but if I hover over stuff, you'd think there'd be some tooltip. This controls blah. No, there's nothing. So I had to go searching online, and every single person who I saw brushes that they made, they're really cool. They pretty much all said the same thing. Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I just played with it. And that's the methodology I want you to embrace. Don't get bogged down in the details. Just start experimenting and you'll figure out, oh, okay, that's what it does. Now, I can explain it a little better than what I ever heard, and that is on the size. It's in this one, it's 100%. Right now, it's a fixed rate, so it's going to lock it in 100%. Won't even let you control these. We're going to change all of these to random, like this. Now notice there's pressure sensitivity, but this is only going to work if you have a Wacom tablet or a tablet like a Wacom set up where you have pressure sensitivity via a tablet pencil. I specifically have Wacom installed on this machine, so it knows that. So it's giving me this option, but we're not going to be doing that in these movies. We're just going to select random for all of these. but that just gives you another level of kind of control when you have the pressure sensitivity. So now that all these are actually this one should be random. All these are random, we can now control both the left and the right. So what does that mean? Well, the left is, in terms of size, how small do you want that brush artwork? The size you create the brush, if I move this over, the size we're creating here determines the size by default of that brush when it's applied to a path. Now you can adjust that size by increasing the stroke of the path up or going down to make it smaller in size. But knowing that base size of your brush, how much smaller would you want it to get randomly? Well, we might select this, it'd go, I don't even like using the sliders. It's so much easier to just type it in. We might go, well, I want it to get maybe 85% smallest at the smallest point. So between 100 and 85, it'll randomize itself. How much larger would you want it to get? Well, I might want it to get, let's say, 128%. Like that. That's fine. Now on the spacing, it's the same type of principle. Do you want the spacing to be uniform, in which case you could keep the spacing each at 100%, or you could go lower? No, I want the spacing to be random too. So we might do, maybe it's 30%. And then on the spacing, how much larger would you want the spacing? Well, I wouldn't want it to go more than 40%, let's say. Scatter, another randomness. This is where you want to play lightly with this one. You wouldn't want to do like 40% or something. Well, you can experiment with it. That's fine. Actually, let's just do that. We'll just punch in 40 here. But on this one, I'm going to use only 3%. And then on rotation, again, you can go negative. It's not just between 1 and 100. These are degrees here. So we're going to go, well, randomly rotate it from the original orientation to maybe this one's 100 and negative 170. And then we can go on this one, and we want this one to be 180, like that. Once you have all of these set, all you have to do is click OK. And now you have your random brush. Now let's go down here and I'll just demonstrate it. We'll select the paintbrush tool and we'll pick a color. Let's do this nice teal and we'll just paint it out and you can see what it looks like. So that doesn't look too bad. Now here's the beauty of a random brush. Once it's on a path, if you don't like the way it's coming out, it's random. So if all you do, here's the brush we created. If you click this brush, you'll re-randomize it. And you can just keep doing this until you get something that you think looks good. So that's one nice thing about it. You don't have to repaint it all the time. You can just click the brush to change the randomness. And there's no control. And by the way, I should point out, if you get something you like and you don't want to lose it, then don't click the brush again. Save it, because I've made that mistake in the past. So I just wanted to point that out because I've gotten to a point where, oh, I really like that. And then I clicked it again and I could never get it back to that, just that nice little randomness that it landed on one time. So let's go ahead and click back into here because I'm going to change this from 40 down to 2 like that. And I'm going to click OK. And when you do this kind of change, it's going to say, hey, you already used this brush with the last setting. So it's going to ask you these questions. Do you want to just leave the strokes or apply the strokes? In this case, we're going to click Apply to Strokes. And you can see, again, that randomness changed. Now notice it's more wrapped onto that path. And that's because it wasn't pushing it away from that path because we added it 40%. Instead, it's keeping it pretty close. And so it's a pretty uniform one. But it's going to work really great. And once again, you can pick any colors you want. So if we pick this color and we go here and we select multiply, and we'll even set the transparency to 70 like that. And now if I grab the paintbrush tool and I go over the top of this, you can see how you can just get so many cool looking effects using that. So that's how you can create a custom scatter brush. In this case, it's the one derived from the sponge artwork. Let's go ahead and see what this moss one looks like. Because if we go over here, this is speckle. Oh, I guess I didn't create it. I thought I created the moss one. Okay, we'll go ahead and create the moss one. That's fine. Like that. And actually, I'm going to do something else. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm going to show you how you can kind of cheat a little bit. So if I select the brush we made and I go to the option menu here, oops. Okay, don't do that. See, I had that brush artwork and it applied that scatter brush to it. We don't want that. Let's undo that. Make sure to deselect. If I select the brush we made and I go up here and I go duplicate brush, so it duplicated the brush. So you can see it's a copy. Here's what you can do. You can select this artwork, hold Option down, drag on top of this brush art and let go. It's going to change that brush artwork. In this case, we'll just change it. We'll just use the same settings. We'll go moss brush. Will be really unique. We'll click OK. So that's a quick way. Once you get some settings you really like and you think are performing well, just make a copy of that brush, apply whatever new art you want to it, and rename it, of course, and you're ready to go. So once we have that, I can select this, the paintbrush tool. Since it's moss, we'll just go to a nice moss color, and I'll just kind of go out like that. Maybe we change it to a brown like this, and we'll go to multiply, set some attributes, we'll go 80, like that. And you can see just how nice it just ends up looking. You could see this being used for flora. Now, here's the cool part about a scatter brush. Unlike an art brush, it works really good for just doing little taps. So if I wanted to add more here, I could just go tap like that, or tap over here like this. And you can model, you can really kind of build up. Or maybe I go back to this green, but instead of the full value of the green, I want it maybe 50% like that. And I can go in and just add those little details. So it's a really great way to do that kind of detailing as well. And once again, you can't really do that on an art brush. It won't work as well. It might work well on certain artwork, but for the most part, scatterbrush is the best way to go to do that. So I just wanted to show you that. Let's jump to this one because here's additional brushes. This is far more uniform. So let's do this. I'm going to copy this and slide it down. And let's do red. We'll color that one red. Now I'm going to take this, and we have this brush already saved here. So I'm going to go ahead and click it like that. And you can see it's more uniform. If we go back to that sponge one, a little more random, a little more chunky. So there's a lot of characteristics you can have on your brushes. This one is made from plaster. It was just an old wall with thick plaster on it, and I took a photograph, created this brush from it, and it works really good to do this kind of texturing. Now again, this is scatter brush. So if I go ahead, let's go ahead and just delete this one, and I'll demonstrate this. Let's just go ahead and use the layer that I made to do this on instead of that. And so we're going to go back to the splatter brush, and I'll just go like this, and you can see how it just creates a red. Doesn't really do it justice. Let's do a brownish kind of color like that. Then if we take another color, maybe we'll take a tan, this kind of color, and I don't know, let's do overlay, see what that looks like, and we'll do 80%, and we'll go the other way like that, and wow, that looks really, it almost looks like it's masked within, because it's, when it hits the white, it's not showing up, only where the texture is, so that's kind of cool. Let's do another one. Let's go multiply. We'll get some green in it. Go over it again like that. Again, you can control the size by controlling the stroke. Maybe we make that one twice as big. So a lot of stuff you can do. Let's take a look at this uniform one. You know, big, looks really great, would be great to do certain kinds of detailing like that. So that looks good. Let's try this one. It's another one. Try this one. That looks great. And here's the other one. So a lot of fun. Scatter brushes are more organic. Now, I do feel it necessary to say you will kind of bloat a file because these aren't small. If I take this, and by the way, I'm going to take credit for something in Illustrator here because I distinctly, when I went to India in 2019 and we were assigned engineers, I said they wanted us to bring a list of issues. And one of my issues was on scatter brushes. When I expand this, why does it add a no fill, no stroke bounding box around each little permutation of the brush? What do I mean by that? Well, let's go to Object. We're going to go to Expand Appearance like this. You can see it expanded it. Right now it's still Group. We'll go ahead and ungroup it. And I might have ungrouped it too much. Let's go back one step. There. So we have each little permeation. Well, what it did before now, because they fixed it, it would have a no fill, no stroke box around it. And it made no sense. And I go, why can't you just make it so there's no boxes, none of those bounding boxes? Literally overnight they changed it, so that's great. Now an art brush, they still have them on it. I should have told them do it to art brushes too, because those have the bounding boxes when you expand them. But the reason why I'm pointing this out because you need to be aware of how many anchor points this can add to a file. I'm going to go into my Astute program here, and I'm going to open up PathScribe just because it'll show me how many anchor points. So just one brush, 5,557. All of these for this path, 61,127. So just be aware of that. It's normal. That's the way scatter brushes work. So don't worry about it. Once again, if you have a Wacom, I have a Cintiq Pro 13 like this, and I can use these exact same brushes. I don't have it set up, or I would show you this. I'm going to do that in a separate movie for people of process. But it works really great just because you get the pressure sensitivity as well. Just make sure you use a drawing glove. That makes it easy. And again, you can do really cool pressure sensitive work with it. So that's great. Now, when you're working out a scatter brush, again, a source. Guess where this source came from? You probably know by now, but this came from a toothbrush, just dipping it in, splattering a screen. But I did that so I could just isolate one area of that. And that's where this came from, this image here. And it's going to work great for a brush. If I hover over this one, you can see the speckling brush. That's where this one came from. That's how I created it. Let's go ahead and select this. And you can see how it creates this nice little speckling. It's great. So never discount how you can create a brush and where a brush can come from. Let's turn this on because I just want to show you just how quickly you can do something really cool. Now, I didn't have any of this planned out, so hopefully this won't look really horrible. We'll take, I'm going to take the plaster one first. We'll select the background color here, and I'm going to go to a stroke. We'll do it 2, and we'll just see what this looks like. Oh, that's not the background color. What is this? Yeah, there we go. So you can see that's probably a little too big. So we'll go down 1 like that. I want it to overlap a little bit. That looks good. Go down here. Maybe we go 1.5. Once again, to control the size of the brush like that. Maybe we want to get some of those speckles going here. We'll go even larger to 3. We'll go over You know, you're getting some nice authenticity there. Maybe we're going to change the color, and we want some of that color to come in here like that. So there's so many things you can do with this that is just a lot of fun. Let's take the moss one. We'll go to this dark brown. We'll go to transparency. We'll set this for multiply, but I want this pretty faint, so we'll try 20 first. And I don't know what 3 will look like. Okay, yeah, that's way too big. Let's go to 1. That's not bad. I think it's the kind of thing where, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. I'll just leave that one. Well, on this one, I might go back to this color. Yeah, it's a little more forgiving like that. But that's all it takes. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can go in, keep adding more texture. Here's speckling, more speckling on it. You can go overboard. Maybe I bring in some red. You know, a lot of things you can do. We'll bring in some white. You can just keep going at it as much as you want. So a lot of things you can do with these. So what I want to point out is all of these types, whether it's art brushes, scatter brushes, or pattern brushes, there's a lot of resources in the exercise files. And this is a great scatter brush set that I've included in the exercise files for scatter brushes. So make sure to check those out, because this is what you can do with it. And I've included this source file in the exercise files as well, so you can deconstruct it yourself and see how I applied those brushes to pull this off. This was the year of the pig, Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year. Here's another one I did where I used these scatter brushes to do all the shading on this wolf. Specifically, turned it into a one-color design for a werewolf type of t-shirt. So a lot of things you can do with it. Let's take a look at one more scatter brush. And this one, I want to walk you through the production of it, because you don't always have to create one asset like the bark one. I took it from a tree and that's it. That's the brush. No, you can compose from a lot of different sources. So if we look at this, and I colored these differently just so you can see that these are all different parts that I've just composed on top of one another. Let's put those back into place. And all I do is I go to the lasso tool. Once I have an area, maybe I want to have, let's say, I want to just have this part here like this. So I'll select all these and we'll just delete them like that. And notice when you do that, you see how all those anchor points show up and you can't see the art with it. That's why I turn that off. So most of the time we won't say that, but maybe I feel like we need to have a few more flecks of this in this area here. Maybe down like right up here, something like that. That's all I'm doing, is composing from already previously sourced artwork that I've image traced. Once I've done that, I'll select all of these and I'll just go to Pathfinder and I'll go Unite. It's going to fuse everything together. Whatever the topmost shape is, it'll take on that color. It took on magenta. We'll color it the inky black like we do, like this. But this is a pretty big brush. I wouldn't want it this big. So we'll just clone it, Command-C, Command-F. I'll bring it down below, and I'm going to scale this down by 50% like that. And this is what we'll make our brush at. But let me select this, and I just want to point out again, we'll go back to PathScribe. This has 44,000 anchor points. So what I want to do is I want to simplify it a bit. I want to get it down some from 44,000 to, I don't know, something a little more reasonable, because 44,000 is kind of absurd. So with this selected, I'll go to Object, I'll go to Path, I'll go to Simplify. Now, if you've never used Simplify in Illustrator, this will not be what you see initially. It'll be a really thin menu. and you'll have to click to expand it. And once you do that, click this. It used to open up to this, and this confuses people. Retain my latest settings and directly open this dialog. I don't know why they oversimplified it. It's not very helpful. So make sure to have this checked so this always opens up. It just makes life easier. And you can notice it's telling us this has 44,000 anchor points, and this will show us what our settings are going to change it to. So instead of maximum, I'm going to go down to about 50%. Let's see what that does. Like that. And you can see it's dropped off over 25,000 anchor points already. That's pretty good. Now, maybe you might want a little more, in which case you could bring this up. I don't know, maybe bring it up there or something like that. And I think from 44,000 to 15,000, I mean, 15,000 is still a lot. But if you overdo it, it's going to look unauthentic the larger you use the pattern or the scatter brush in. So I don't want to do that. So it's finding that happy medium, just knowing that it is going to be a large file because it's a lot of anchor points. So we'll click OK. So I just wanted to show you that, how I simplify. Once we have this now, I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus button in the brushes. We'll select scatter brush. We'll click OK. I'm going to name this one degrade brush, like that. We're going to change again all these to random. Again, if you have Wacom, you could select pressure. I'm not using that in this movie. We'll use orientation on the path. We'll change this to tints so we can color it. And I'm going to go ahead and punch in some numbers. I've kind of pre-tested this. We'll do 30. And by the way, if you're not sure where to start, just start with what I have and experiment and see if you like something better. That's basically what I did years ago. I opened up brushes that I had seen somebody create, looked at their settings, played around with it until I figured out what I like, and I go from there. So this might look familiar because I tend to use pretty close to the same settings almost all the time for this type of brush, which is going to map onto a path just so it controls it better. So once we have that, we'll just click OK. And we have our brush right here, the degrade brush, ready to go. And this is where we'll go to the testing ground, and we can pick any color. Let's do this kind of eggplant color, and we'll go like that. And you can see that looks pretty cool. Let's do it a little bigger. Let's go 3. Like that. So that looks pretty good. It's a nice brush. So we're going to put this to use now. So let's go to our design. Here's our design here. We'll turn on this layer. This is the layer we're going to be painting on. I don't want it on 3. Let's change this to 2 or 1, I mean, like that. Because the background's black, we're just going to color it black. So I'll just make this the nice black color here. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to start painting. And remember, if you go into your fidelity settings on your paintbrush tool, just make sure it's closer to smooth. It's going to work better that way. You could go all the way smooth, but I don't like going all the way smooth. I go to that point, click OK. So all we're going to do now is we're just going to paint out this stroke like that. And this is the case where, if you think it needs to be a little bigger, I think this one should be a little bigger. We'll go 1.5. Ooh, I like that because it cuts into the skull part. That's fine. Then we'll go down here. Maybe I want to add some right here like that. That's too much. Let's go down to 1 point. That looks good, like it's getting blown away. And then, let's see, we'll try 3. Now, if I go right over the top, it's going to cover too much stuff. Yeah. I don't want that. So I'm going to go off a little bit like that. And that kind of looks good. And once again, with the scatter brush, if I just click in an area like right here, it'll add just one permutation of that brush. And I do that quite a bit. I don't want to use 3 again. Let's go down to 1. I'll put 1 here. That looks pretty good. Maybe 2. Add 1 here. So this is how, in this case, I would kind of add some nice texturing to this design using a scatter brush like this. Now if I turn on both these layers, this is all the scattering in place. I also like to go in and utilize other methods like the speckling. So if I turn on this, you can see a little more detail down here, but I want to also turn on this layer because this is where I like to go in and not just take away from the design in terms of the black brush, but it looks more authentic if you have some of that base color kind of breaking off. So in this case, it's like particles of the white, and I think that's important. I use that speckle brush here, and this is where I'll go in on the speckle brush, maybe 1.5 like that. Maybe it needs some over here. I might add a little, oops, I'm still on black. Let's change that to white. So I might add some, okay, that's too much. Let's just add there. That looks good. I might go over here. Okay, that's a little big. Let's go down like that. So there is no wrong way to do this. It's all about experimentation, trying stuff until you get it right. Now, obviously, if I'm doing a t-shirt, for example, on this, I'm not going to give the vendor a file with live brushes. So you do have to expand it. And that's just going to mean it's going to, well, let's expand one of these. We'll take this one here and we'll expand it. We'll go Object and we'll go Expand. And you can see now the amount of points, it has 5,000. So that's not too bad. But ultimately, when I do all the brush work and I expand all the brush work and then I have to unite it with the pathfinder, make sure it's a compound path, and then punch it through my base artwork. And so I want to show you an example, a simplified example of that. So if we take this, and again, we go to Object, we go to Expand. It's going to expand. Notice how many anchor points this is. 308,000 plus, almost 309,000. It's kind of nuts. So if you go to your, let's go to the appearance panel, bring that up here. Notice it's going to say a group. Now, if I select the artwork that's underneath it, this artwork is a compound. If I try to minus front this from this artwork, it won't work because it's a group. So you have to turn this into a compound, meaning Object, Compound, Make. Notice I have F7, so I just hit F7 to do that. Once that's a compound, then I can select both, and the object on top using Pathfinder will go minus front, and that's basically going to subtract that texture out of that background shape, which is our design. And once it's done, now it's set up in a way that could be used by a screen printer to run out film, to print a shirt. But notice it's going to revert back to a group, so you always want to make sure you change it back into a compound, because if you're going to do more edits or you're going to subtract that brush that you've expanded out of the artwork, you're going to lose shapes if you don't do that. So just a good habit to get into. So clean artwork. Is this bad design? No. Does it look cooler? When you put it on a cool photographic background and you do some brush work on it, it looks awesome. Now this one actually looks like, okay, we're going to unlock it like that. And I'm going to select this because I wanted to show you, you can colorize it. So instead of white, we'll go ahead and colorize it like that. Deselect it. And that looks pretty cool. So that's how I would use scatter brushes in the context of this type of design. I wanted to show you more of a graphic design, not an illustration. Obviously, scatter brushes work great for illustration because they bring in an organic flair, which Vector isn't really known for. It's known for hard edge, clean artwork. That's why it's ideal for branding. But when you can work in this kind of organic quality and characteristic to a design, makes it even better. So that covers the second format of brushes in Adobe Illustrator. We're going to move on to the third format coming up next. The last, but certainly not the least, vector brush format is pattern brushes. Now, unlike art brushes and scatter brushes, which are very organic and is derived from a piece of artwork that you create, and that can come from a photograph, as I showed you, or you could make it manually with a sponge, like I also showed you. You can do that type of thing with the pattern brush. It's a little more complicated, but this is more of a design-centric type of brush. It's a design-centric feature in that it allows you to create things that are seemingly complex, but if you can think in a format that is a pattern brush, it's relatively easy. So let's dive right into it and first take a look at what a full pattern brush is. It's made up of 5 parts. It's an outside corner, a straight, an inside corner, a beginning, and an end. And this makes up a full pattern brush. Now, the part you have to understand is in order for it to register and work seamlessly as it wraps around any type of path, is it has to have a central orientation. That's what the green line represents. But these bounding boxes are what is going to assure that it stays in registration, because frankly, some of these aren't exactly aligned. So if I, for example, take this one, let's go ahead and grab this art, copy it, and we'll just paste it, bring it down here. We'll take this one, we'll copy it, and we'll paste this one too. If I take these two and I vertically align them like this, or horizontally align them, and then I drag this one over to snap to this edge, notice it's not going to perfectly align because it doesn't mathematically align vertically. But what we want to do to create the illusion is we want to align it so when it connects, it acts as a seamless piece of artwork. And that's where these bounding boxes come in. These bounding boxes assure that regardless of the actual image area of the brush itself, it's going to align. But we don't want this to be part of the pattern, so I'm just going to select all these bounding brushes and just make them a no fill, no stroke bounding box. It's grouped with our piece of artwork, so as I select each one, you can see how it's still proportionately the square, or in this case on the straight, a rectangle. So that's all I want to do. And the first part we're going to use is this. And again, all of these are colored, are inky blue color here. And that's so that it works. That principle I showed you will work whether you're working CMYK or RGB. So we're going to select this, go to the brushes palette, open it up. We're going to click the plus sign. We're going to select the pattern brush and click OK. You can see it orients it to the straight edge area. That's what this category. Here are the 5 categories. Now, Illustrator, I forget how many versions back, added this, oh, let me create an automatic corner for you. Well, rarely do I see it do it well, so I don't like it. And so what I usually do is I just choose to ignore it and create my own. So all we have here is straight. And if you remember those line work brushes I showed you with Pack and Sal, and I put it on the outside of the shape with the same fill color on the inside, this is all it was the straight edge. And that's one way you can kind of use these formats in a way that wasn't really expected by the engineers. They thought, well, you'd create a full pattern. Well, you don't have to. It just depends on what you want to create. So on this one, we'll go ahead and name this one. I'm going to name it Plasma. And we'll go down to Method and select Tints so we can colorize it and click OK. So you see it show up here, and it has one. This is the corner straight. This is the inside corner, so on and so forth. And so in order to add the rest of our art to this, we're going to go ahead and expand this just a little bit. That way we can see all five sections. What we have to do is select the corner here, hold Option down, drag over on top of that selection and drop it. It'll align to the corner where it's supposed to go. But if this throws you off, and it threw me off when I forget what version it was, but it wasn't always this way. When you used to drop it in, it actually was the same size as the straight one, but you can see this is large. And when this first happened, when I used it, I go, well, wait a minute, what did I do wrong? It's the same size. I thought I did something wrong. Once again, most people, when they run into stuff like this in Illustrator, think they're doing something wrong. Well, unfortunately, Illustrator wouldn't consider this a bug. I do. It should be the correct visual display of what we just put in, and it's not larger. So why is it showing it larger? You know, that's the point I'm trying to make. Just ignore it. You're not doing anything wrong. Now that it's in, we don't have to do anything else. It still has our tint, still has our name. We just added that art that way, but it opens this up and you'll just have to click OK. So we have that part. We'll take the inside path and we'll go ahead and click it and hold option down as we drag it into this spot. It's going to put it on the inside corner. Now, if you're wondering what the inside corner is, these little diagrams kind of explain it. This is the outside corner. This is to the inside corner. And so that's what it's applying it to this inside corner here. So that's what that is. We'll click OK on that. We're going to go to the beginning here, drag, hold option down, drop into place. It'll put it at the start. This is where it will start. Think of this as the feather if this is a bent, crooked arrow of sorts. This is the feather end or the end. In this case, it would be the end if it's an arrow, but this is what they consider the start tile of a pattern brush. And we'll click OK. Then we'll just do the same thing on the end part here. Hold option down and drop it in, and that'll put the end part in. Click OK. So now we have a complete pattern brush. That's what's showing here. And now we want to go ahead and put this to use. Now, before I show you exactly how to use it, let me turn on this layer because this is how it will wrap around things with the complete brush. So it has the start here, it goes into the outside corner, this one, to the straight edge, this one, to the inside corner, this one, and to the end tile, which is this one. Just think of it as a tiling that can wrap around a path. And because we've created corners, it can go around a rectangle or a square. So that's the benefit of doing this. It's so you can do tiled type of border treatments, let's say, if you want to, and this is how you could pull it off, whatever design you have. Let's take a look at how you go ahead and use it. We have this rectangle. All we're going to do is select this. I'm going to go ahead and color this blue, the blue color here, and we're going to click on our plasma pattern brush, and it's going to wrap around, and you get a really kind of nice, kind of organic, free-flowing shape here. Now, another thing I like to do when I'm working with a pattern brush like this is I'll select it. I'll go ahead and clone it, Command-C, Command-F, and then I'll go to the Reflect tool here. From the center, I'll go ahead and reflect it horizontally, and so it's flipped it horizontally. Instead of keeping it blue, we'll keep it yellow, And then I'll change the blend mode, in this case, to multiply, and you can see how cool you can make some look. Now, if you want something to be a little larger, I think the yellow would look good a little larger. You control the size again, just like any other brush, whether art brush or scatter brush, by changing the stroke size. So we'll add another half point to it, and I think that looks even better. So that's how you can create your own full pattern brush. But that said, it doesn't always have to be a full pattern, meaning every single part. Much like the line work brushes, which were just the straight part of the pattern brush to pull off that. And we're going to be going over that in part 2. But I want to show you what a partial pattern brush is. So a partial pattern brush is, you might not create the corners, or you don't need the beginning or the end tile. And so these are all kind of what I would consider partial patterns. It's just the straight area. It's still going to create a seamless look and feel. That's fine. And again, these repeat side by side, up and down, doesn't matter when it comes to pattern brushes. It's just side by side, horizontally, so it can infinitely tile itself along a path, whether that path is long, enclosed, like these two paths are for the circle, or this more freeform one, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this chain link, click the plus, go to the pattern brush, click OK. We don't need a corner. Notice how it tries to make a corner. That looks horrible. So maybe they can use, I don't know, artificial intelligence to actually intelligently design something. Who knows? Anyway, we're just going to use the straight part. Of course, we'll click tints to control the color, and we'll just call this chain link and click OK. We're going to take this one. We'll go ahead and click the plus sign, click pattern brush, no corner, I wish you could check that to never do that, but you can't. And we'll go small chain, and we'll select tint to colorize it. Here's another one. This one is more of like a thorny bush, or the crown of thorns if you want. And we'll click the plus on the brushes palette, select pattern brush. Again, actually, that one's not, well, yeah, they are bad. I thought it looked okay small, but it isn't. And we'll just call this one thorns. And we'll select tints so we can color it. And the last one is a full color one. Now, most of the brushes I've shown you so far, we've just created the base art in inky black. This is the case where I know what the final color needs to be, and so I just decided to create my brush art, my pattern brush art that is, in full color, so we can add it the same way. Hit the plus sign, select pattern brush, click OK. We just don't need to colorize it. It's already colored. And as far as auto-generated corners go, that's not too bad, but still, I don't like it. So we're going to just call this one, and I love the nickname Cowboys gave barbed wire. Ever since I heard it, that's what I referred to it as. Instead of barbed wire, we're going to call this Devil's Rope. I've always loved that slang term that Cowboys gave it. So we'll click OK, and now we have that. Now let's put them to use, and I'll show you how they work. We can select this. Once again, whatever color your path is, we'll go ahead and apply the chain link. Now we got a chain link. Now, think if you had to try to build this without the pattern brush. This would be a real pain and take a long time. It really doesn't. This is a geometric build with circular shapes and straight shapes. Not too hard to get this working, but that looks pretty cool. Maybe you want this to be somewhat of a gold chain. It could be a gold chain, but I think the gold chain works better with the smaller one. So here's the smaller chain. Again, to adjust the size, right now it's this. Maybe you want it a smaller, like 0.5. And because the art shrinks down, it'll also replicate that pattern going around more times. And this looks more believable for the type of chain it is because it usually is smaller. It's not a link kind of chain. And if you have that smaller, this doesn't look as good as it did in terms of the gray and bigger, bulky chains. So there's that. That's kind of cool. Now, also, let's take a look at the thorns. We'll go ahead and do the thorns there. I'm going to bump this back up to 1 point. I'm going to color it red. And that looks absolutely cool. Once again, if you tried to build this manually without pattern brush, it'd be a real pain to pull it off and do it really, really well. So this does save a lot of time. Now, the other art, and this art that I used with the devil's rope, we'll go ahead and apply that to this circle here. And I actually created this when I did some trading cards for Upper Deck. I used to work for Upper Deck trading cards down in Carlsbad, California. I worked there about 4 years. And then I moved back to Oregon and I freelanced for them for another decade. They've gone through some business problems over the last 5-6 years, but they seem to be coming out of it, and I might be doing some more work for them, so that's kind of cool. Now, I did this because the subset that I created for them was called Rebels, and I just thought barbed wire kind of exemplified that. And if I beef this stroke up, right now it's a 1 point. If I go up to 2, it simplifies it. And I like that even more because it worked better at the smaller size on a trading card because it had a nice little letter in it. Now, I should point out it's easy to break any pattern brush. So if I take this, let's say we go even larger with this. You know, that doesn't look horrible, but if you try to push it larger, that looks pretty bad. So you can break any of these brushes. That applies to any of the brushes. So maybe this thorn, if we go pretty big on this thorn, that actually doesn't look bad that big. But as soon as you go past a certain point, it's going to look a bit wonky. So this one would work actually really small or kind of big. So that one's actually a very flexible one. So just keep that in mind. It's easy to break any pattern brush if you push it far enough. Let's take a look at another one. This is exploring different styles. So I worked on this design and I wanted to add kind of a rim around this motif, but make it a border treatment. And so I decided, hey, what if I just made it rope? And so I made this rope initially. We'll go ahead and click the plus sign, click pattern brush, click OK. This corner one is kind of bad like that. And by the way, you can tell once we apply it. Actually, let's first name this. Do one thing at a time. Rope 1, and we'll go tint, and we'll click OK. I purposely rounded these. If they came to a point, then technically it would work better if you had a corner. But because these are subtle rounds going around the shape, it's going to work fine. So if I select that and I apply this pattern brush to it, that's way too big. So let's kind of cut that down in size, go here. And I think something like that, you know, maybe even, nope, I think maybe halfway in between. So we'll go 0.75 isn't bad. I still think I like 0.5 better. So there's that. Now, when I did this, I didn't mind it, but I thought the rope, it looked okay, but I think it could look even better. And so this just shows you how I created the base art, and it just has to center. So whatever goes off on the left is coming in on the right. So it's the same principle as a repeat pattern design. It's just in this case being mapped only horizontally along the path. So this is where I'd take this shape, and I'd intersect them with Pathfinder. So I go intersect, and then we're just going to get rid of the outline and fill it with the inky black. Now that we have this, select it, click the plus sign, click the pattern brush, click OK, say no to the auto-generated corner tile, and we'll call this one Rope 2. and we'll add tints so we can color it and click OK. I'll select this now and I'll apply the new rope. I think this would look better at 0.75, and I think that looks more rope-like. So that's how I do style exploration in the context of pattern brushes, and rope's pretty easy. So you could try even other kind of look and feel if you wanted to. You could do it in full color if you wanted to as well, much like we did the Devil's Rope. So I want to show you also what I call a non-bounding brush type of pattern brush. So once again, the proportions here are key. The proportions of each corner and the straight. Just because the straight in the pattern brush, the brush palette shows the straight edge of a pattern brush as 3 segments, it doesn't have to be a rectangle. It can be a perfect square. It's just going to be applied to straight areas along any given length of path as the square. So ours here is a square. This corner is a perfect square. This inside corner is a perfect square. The cap here aligns with these squares from this side on either side of the straight edge. And this front part of the pencil in this case is what we're going to create here, also aligns. And it's proportionately a square. Well, a sorts. It has a squared edge at one side, which is all you need on the beginning and the end tile. So we're going to do the same. We'll just select this and we'll just click the plus sign, click pattern brush. As far as corners, that's not bad. That's actually kind of what I created, but it doesn't have a round. Mine does. So I like mine better. So we'll turn that off and we'll call this to be or not to be. Come on, that's pretty funny. I entertain myself. We'll click OK. OK. Now we'll select the corner, drag it, hold Option down, put it there. That's fine. Click OK. Grab the inside corner, hold Option down, drag it, drop, click OK. Take the start and drop it in, click OK. Take the in, drop it in, and click OK. Now we got a full pencil. This one actually looks like a little stubby pencil. You know how many stubby pencils I have? I have they build up over time because I get to a certain length, and instead of just using it till I can barely hold on to it, I just grab a new pencil, and then I end up with a whole cup of stubbies. So that has nothing to do with I'm showing you. It just made me think of it. So we'll go ahead and select this path, apply this brush to it, and notice, once again, whatever color is on the path, it's going to take on that color. And I made a mistake, and I'm glad I made this mistake because I haven't made this mistake in a while. I accidentally selected tint, not thinking, because our artwork's colored. We don't need that. So let's go back, and we're going to go none. We're going to go OK. And yes, apply to stroke. And that's what I meant to do. I wanted to get that nice squiggle pencil because we already worked out the color. We don't need to color it. But you can see what happens if you do select tint. It kind of turns into a grayscale. Not a very good one at that. So pay attention. Don't go off the rails and start telling stories about stubby pencils, or you'll make mistakes too. So let's take a look at another way you can use something like this. Maybe you're doing a comp for a writer's conference. We could use that, and that would work pretty good. Now, would it be super, super hard to create this without a pattern brush? Not really, but it would take you a bit of time. This is a lot faster, especially if it's a comp. Mock it up, get them to approve it, and if they do, then you can build it clean. You'd never give them a final brand asset that's actually an editable pattern brush. That's not smart. Let's take a look at a form-fitting brush. What do I mean by that? Well, you've seen ones where you didn't use any bounding box like the pencil because it was proportionate to a square, so those are easy. The rope were easy and all the other chains and the devil's rope and the thorn, all of those just repeat side by side. Well, what if you want to do something that's proportionately form-fitting? Meaning, if you look at this border treatment, it's the same vertical height as the corner. So that means we don't need a bounding brush for us. It's gonna align and work really, really well. And you can see I've already created the brushes over here. So if I select this and I just select the black one, maybe it's just a one color application we want, you can see how it repeats that around this circular shape, and that looks kind of cool. This would be really hard to build because it's all on curved geometry, but with a pattern brush, you build it straight. It's really easy to work with. And again, you can control the size by controlling the path. So this one actually looks better if you go a little smaller rather than one. This isn't bad, but I think this looks a lot nicer. And the smaller you go, the more it's going to repeat that around like that. And again, you can break it. So if you do that, it's kind of interesting, but it no longer looks very nice. This is okay, but this is better. And I think this is even better yet. So there's that. Now, if you create your brush in color, then I could simply select this color brush and it would colorize all those sections like that, which is kind of cool. So you can do this in a lot of different ways. So think outside the box, try different things, experiment. It's the best way to figure out how to use any feature in Illustrator, let alone patterns. So I want to show you another example. And that is, I just realized if, let's say I got rid of this and I wanted to create a rectangular shape. All I have is the straight and all I have is the corner. So if I select this and we now apply our brush to it, of course, this one's going to take on the color of the stroke we applied it to. In this case, it's the green color, and that looks good. But what if you want to do a border treatment that has both of the brand colors, the light and dark? Well, when I did this, I noticed that, oops, I got the dark and the light on the wrong side, and I almost went to fix it, and I go, no, I'll show them how to easily fix it. So if I just take this and color it, the light, and take this and color it, the dark, this is the way it should be. And again, I can just click, drag, hold Option down, and it will replace that art, click OK, and then click Apply to Stroke, and it'll fix it. Now it aligns where it's light green goes into light green, dark green goes into the dark green straight areas. So that's how I'd fix something like this. So what's a practical application for this? Well, maybe it's a restaurant menu, and it's just putting a simple little border treatment that kind of reinforces the green aspect to this restaurant. And you could even do cool things like custom plates, etc. So a lot of different things you can do with pattern brushes. They're a lot of fun to work with. So whether you want to create an art brush to mimic a real-world paint stroke look and feel, or you want to create a scatter brush so you can do some organic shading in your artwork, or maybe you want to create something more design-centric for a layout needing a border treatment using a pattern brush, etc. I encourage you to explore and experiment with the methods I've showed and see what you can create yourself. Remember, you can access nearly 100 custom vector brushes included in the exercise files. Just head on over to the link in the movie's description below, and you can get access to those exercise files. They include the source files used in this movie and the various sample artwork I showed. That way you can open it up, and this will allow you to further deconstruct how to use custom vector brushes by studying how I layered a file, what kind of blend modes did I use, and the opacity settings to achieve the final results. Now, a big thank you to those who purchase my exercise files or become a member of my YouTube channel or send me a super chat. It all helps me dedicate more time in creating new content. I appreciate those who have, and always thank you for commenting and sharing my YouTube channel with others as well. Make sure to watch part 2, where I'm going to show you how to use the various formats in somewhat unorthodox ways so you can expand your creative potential and create some awesome aesthetic effects as well. Until next time, thank you for watching People Love Process. And as always, I hope this content helps you to improve your own creative process.